What made an entire school riot? The USB drive felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket as I watched Principal Morrison cut the ribbon on his brand new $200,000 administrative wing. The same week he'd fired Mrs. Chen, the art teacher who'd been here for 15 years and had gotten more kids into college than anyone else on staff. This beautiful new facility represents our commitment to educational excellence, Morrison beamed at the small crowd of parents and school board members. Behind him, the gleaming marble floors and mahogany-paneled offices looked like something out of a Fortune 500 company, not a public high school that couldn't afford new textbooks. I adjusted my phone in my jacket pocket, making sure it was still recording. Every word of this charade was going straight to my evidence folder, the same folder that now contained bank statements, invoices, and email chains that would destroy Morrison and half the school board if anyone with actual authority ever bothered to look at them. "Jake, you getting this?" whispered my best friend Marcus, nudging me with his elbow. Every nauseating second, I muttered back. 3 months. That's how long it had been since I'd first noticed something was off. It started when they announced the budget restructuring that eliminated the music program entirely. Mrs. Rodriguez, who directed our award-winning choir for 8 years, broke down crying in front of her AP Spanish class when she told us she was being reassigned to lunch duty. The drama club got axed next. Then they cut funding for the school newspaper, my school newspaper, where I'd been editor-in-chief since sophomore year. When I tried to write an article questioning the budget cuts, the faculty advisor, Mr. Peterson, pulled me aside after class. "Jake, I'm telling you this as someone who cares about your future," he'd said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't go down this road. Morrison's already talking about your attitude problem in staff meetings. You want to graduate, don't you?" That's when I knew I was onto something big. It took weeks of digging through public records, filing Freedom of Information Act requests, and befriending Sandra, the secretary who'd worked here since before I was born. Sandra had been watching the corruption unfold for months, growing more disgusted each day as she processed invoices for Morrison's business lunches at 5-star restaurants and saw board members submitting receipts for weekend trips to Miami disguised as educational conferences. The breakthrough came last Tuesday. Sandra slipped me copies of the real budget reports, not the sanitized versions they presented at PDA meetings. The numbers were staggering. While they'd cut $150,000 from student programs, Morrison had given himself a $45,000 raise. Board President Catherine Wells had approved $80,000 for consultancy fees that all went to her husband's company. The new administrative wing, funded entirely by money that was supposed to go toward updating our science labs, which still had equipment from the 1990s. But having evidence was only half the battle. I tried going through proper channels first. I presented my findings to the district superintendent, who thanked me politely and did absolutely nothing. I'd contacted the local newspaper, but Morrison's brother-in-law worked there as an editor. I'd even reached out to the state education department, only to have my complaint buried in bureaucratic red tape. Now, watching Morrison pose for photos in front of his marble monument to greed, I fingered the USB drive in my pocket and smiled. Friday night's championship basketball game was going to be very interesting. The next morning, I was pulling books from my locker when I felt someone watching me. I turned to find Morrison himself standing about 10 feet away, talking to Vice Principal Davis but staring directly at me. When our eyes met, he gave me the kind of smile that made my blood run cold. "Mr. Henderson," he called out, approaching with that fake friendly tone administrators use when they're about to ruin your day. "Could I have a word with you in my office?" My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my voice steady. "Sure thing, Mr. Morrison." The walk to his office felt like a death march. The USB drive in my backpack suddenly felt like it weighed 50 pounds. Did he know? Had Sandra been caught? As we passed the main hallway, I noticed 2 school board members, Wells and Thompson, waiting in the administrative wing. This wasn't going to be a friendly chat about my grades. Morrison's office was a shrine to his own ego. Awards, plaques, and photos of him shaking hands with various politicians covered every wall. The leather chair behind his mahogany desk probably cost more than most teachers made in a month. "Please, sit," Morrison said, settling into his throne while I took the uncomfortable plastic chair across from him. "I'll cut right to the chase, Jake. It's come to my attention that you've been asking a lot of questions lately. Filing public record requests. Talking to staff members about sensitive matters." I forced myself to look confused. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir." "Come now," Wells said, entering the office with Thompson close behind. "We know you've been digging into school finances. The question is why a 17-year-old boy thinks he understands complex administrative decisions better than experienced educators." Thompson, a thin man with beady eyes, leaned against the wall. "We also know you've been spending time with certain staff members who might be disgruntled about recent changes." They knew about Sandra. My stomach dropped, but I kept my face neutral. Morrison leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "Jake, you're a smart kid. Good grades, college prospects. It would be a shame if some misguided crusade jeopardized all that hard work. Especially when you're so close to graduation." The threat was crystal clear. "Shut up or get expelled." "I understand you're passionate about school issues," Wells added, her voice dripping with condescension. "But sometimes students don't see the bigger picture. The difficult decisions we have to make to keep this district financially viable." Financially viable? The words slipped out before I could stop them. Is that what we're calling a $45,000 raise while teachers get fired? The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Morrison's fake smile disappeared entirely. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said slowly. "My compensation is determined by the school board based on performance metrics and district benchmarks. It's all completely transparent and above board." "Of course it is," I said, standing up. "Just like those educational conferences in Miami and the consultancy fees to family members." Thompson pushed off from the wall, his face flushed red. "That's enough. You're spreading rumors and lies, young man. Slanderous accusations that could have serious legal consequences." Morrison held up a hand to calm Thompson, but his eyes never left mine. "Jake, I'm going to give you one chance to walk away from this. Focus on your studies, enjoy your senior year, and graduate with your class. But if I hear you've been spreading these conspiracy theories or harassing staff members for information. He let the sentence hang in the air. I walked toward the door, then turned back. You know what's funny? I actually used to respect you. As I left the office, I heard Wells mutter something about entitled kids these days. But what they didn't know was that Sandra had given me more than just financial records. She'd also given me the security footage from last month's closed board meeting. The security footage was a goldmine, but it came with a price I hadn't expected. That afternoon, I found Sandra cleaning out her desk, tears streaming down her face. They fired me, she said quietly when she saw me approaching. Effective immediately. 23 years of service, and they're claiming I violated confidentiality protocols. My chest tightened with guilt. Sandra, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. She shook her head, carefully placing a framed photo of her grandkids into a cardboard box. No, honey. This started long before you came along. I should have spoken up months ago when I first saw what they were doing. What can I do? There has to be something. You can finish what we started, she said firmly, lowering her voice. That footage from the October board meeting. The one where they voted themselves those raises while discussing which teachers to cut. Morrison doesn't know I copied it before they had me hand over my access cards. She slipped me a second USB drive, this one containing video files that would show the entire community exactly who these people really were behind closed doors. But as she walked toward the exit carrying her box of personal belongings, the weight of what I was doing hit me full force. By Thursday, the retaliation campaign was in full swing. My AP history teacher, Mr. Kowalski, pulled me aside after class with an apologetic look on his face. Jake, I've been instructed to inform you that your college recommendation letters are being reviewed, he said, unable to meet my eyes. Apparently there are concerns about your character and leadership potential. The message was clear, Morrison was going after my future, one letter at a time. By lunch, I'd heard from 3 other teachers who'd been advised to reconsider their recommendations. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Park, looked genuinely pained when she told me that my early admission application to Northwestern might need to be withdrawn pending a disciplinary review. But Morrison's biggest mistake was going after Marcus. I found my best friend sitting alone in the cafeteria, staring at a detention slip. What's this for? I asked, sliding into the seat across from him. Apparently I was disruptive in chemistry class yesterday, he said bitterly. Funny thing is, I wasn't even there yesterday. I was home with the flu. They're fabricating charges now. Gets better, Marcus continued. Davis called my parents this morning. Told them I was falling in with a bad influence and they should consider transferring me to Lincoln High for my own good. That's when I realized Morrison wasn't just trying to silence me, he was systematically destroying anyone connected to me. Over the next 2 days, I watched as my friends faced increasingly ridiculous disciplinary actions. Emma got written up for her inappropriate haircut, the same pixie cut she'd had all year. David was suspended for academic dishonesty on an essay he'd written about government transparency. Even kids who barely knew me were getting caught in Morrison's dragnet. The final straw came Thursday evening. I was in my room reviewing the game plan for Friday night when my mom knocked on my door. Jake. There's a call for you. Someone from the district office. The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. Mr. Henderson, this is Patricia Vance from Human Resources. I'm calling to inform you that we've received reports of you harassing staff members and making unfounded accusations against district leadership. If these behaviors continue, we'll have no choice but to pursue legal action for defamation and harassment. After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, weighing my options. I could back down, delete everything, and try to salvage what was left of my senior year. Maybe Northwestern would still take me if I groveled enough. Or I could go nuclear tomorrow night and hope the truth was worth the fallout. I pulled up the security footage on my laptop and watched Morrison laugh while discussing which dead-weight teachers to eliminate next. The choice was easier than I'd expected. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp February air that made everything feel sharper, more real. I'd barely slept, running through the plan over and over in my head. The championship game against Roosevelt High was sold out, nearly 3,000 people packed into our gymnasium, plus the live stream that would broadcast to anyone who couldn't make it in person. It was perfect. What wasn't perfect was walking into school and finding half my co-conspirators missing. Where's Tyler? I asked Emma during first period, glancing at the empty desk where our AV club president usually sat. Suspended, she whispered back. Something about hacking into the school's Wi-Fi network. Complete bullshit, Tyler can barely figure out Netflix passwords. My blood ran cold. Tyler was supposed to handle the technical side tonight, switching the halftime show feed to broadcast our evidence instead of the usual highlight reel. Without him, the whole plan fell apart. By lunch, the casualties were mounting. David had been pulled out of school by his parents after receiving a call from Morrison about concerning behavioral changes. Sarah, who worked the student concession stand and was going to help create a distraction, was suddenly assigned to mandatory SAT prep during the game. Even Marcus looked nervous, checking over his shoulder every few seconds. Dude, they know something, he said as we sat in the nearly empty journalism classroom. This isn't coincidence. I pulled out my phone and showed him the text I'd received that morning from an unknown number. Smart kids know when to quit. Not so smart ones learn the hard way. Jesus, Marcus breathed. Maybe we should. No. I cut him off. This is exactly why we can't back down. Look what they're doing to everyone. This is what corruption looks like when it's desperate. But privately, I was panicking. Without Tyler, I'd have to figure out the broadcast system myself, and my technical skills were basically limited to PowerPoint presentations and TikTok videos. I spent the entire afternoon in the library, watching YouTube tutorials on video switching equipment and praying I wouldn't electrocute myself trying to rewire the gymnasium sound system. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. At 3:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with a message from an account I didn't recognize. Check your locker. A friend. Inside, I found a handwritten note and a small device that looked like a modified USB adapter. Asterisk Jake, heard about Tyler. This little gadget will do what you need. Plug it into any port on the main control board in the AV booth. It'll override their system and broadcast whatever's on your laptop. You'll have maybe 10 minutes before they can manually shut it down. Make them count. A concerned teacher who believes in doing the right thing, asterisk. My hands were shaking as I read it. Someone else was fighting back, someone with access and technical knowledge. But who? And more importantly, could I trust them? The answer came during 7th period when Mr. Peterson, my old newspaper advisor, caught my eye during his lecture on media ethics. He gave me the slightest nod, so subtle I almost missed it. Peterson. The man who'd warned me off this story months ago was now helping me expose it. The irony was almost funny. As the final bell rang and students began streaming toward the gymnasium for pre-game warm-up, I felt the familiar weight of both USB drives in my jacket pocket. The financial records, the security footage, and now a way to broadcast it all to 3,000 people simultaneously. Tonight, Westfield High was going to learn the truth about Principal Morrison and his cronies. The only question was whether I'd still be enrolled here on Monday morning. The gymnasium was electric with pre-game energy when I slipped into the AV booth at 6:15 p.m. The Roosevelt Eagles had arrived an hour earlier, their bright red jerseys a stark contrast to our blue and gold. In the stands, parents clutched foam fingers and homemade signs while the pep band warmed up with a surprisingly decent version of "We Will Rock You." What they didn't know was that half the school board was strategically positioned throughout the crowd, ready to damage control whatever disruption they suspected was coming. I spotted Morrison near the scorer's table, glad-handing donors and boosters like the politician he'd always wanted to be. Wells sat in the VIP section with her husband, the same husband whose consulting company had mysteriously received $80,000 in district funds. Thompson was working the crowd near the concession stand, probably spreading preemptive lies about troubled students spreading rumors. My laptop was hidden in an equipment bag, along with Peterson's override device and every piece of evidence Sandra and I had collected. The plan was simple: wait until halftime when attention was at its peak, then hijack the video board for a 10-minute crash course in administrative corruption. But at 6:23 p.m., everything started falling apart. Jake. A voice behind me made me spin around. Vice Principal Davis stood in the doorway of the AV booth, flanked by Officer Martinez, the school's resource officer. "We need to have a chat." My heart hammered against my ribs. "I'm just helping with the sound system, Mr. Davis. Tyler's out sick, so—" "Cut the act," Davis interrupted. "Empty your pockets. Now." There was nowhere to run. The booth was essentially a closet overlooking the gym floor, with Davis blocking the only exit. I could see Martinez's hand resting casually on his radio, ready to call for backup if I tried anything stupid. Slowly, I pulled out my phone, my wallet, and a pack of gum. Davis wasn't buying it. The bag too. I unzipped the equipment bag with trembling fingers, watching Davis's face as he spotted my laptop. He reached for it, but Martinez suddenly stepped forward. "Hold on, Tom," the officer said quietly. "What exactly are we looking for here?" Davis shot him an annoyed look. "Stolen property. Confidential documents. This kid's been harassing staff and making wild accusations for weeks." "What kind of accusations?" Martinez asked, and I caught something in his tone that gave me hope. "Financial impropriety. Claims about budget mismanagement. Complete fabrications designed to undermine district leadership." Martinez nodded slowly, then looked at me. "Jake, these documents Mr. Davis is talking about, where did you get them?" It was a loaded question. If I mentioned Sandra, she could face criminal charges for breach of confidentiality. But if I lied, Martinez would know. "Freedom of Information Act requests," I said carefully. "All public records." "Public records?" Davis scoffed. "You've been sneaking around after hours, bribing secretaries, spreading conspiracy theories." "Bribing?" Martinez raised an eyebrow. "That's a serious accusation, Tom. You have evidence of that?" The crowd below erupted as our starting lineup was announced, temporarily drowning out Davis's spluttering response. Through the booth window, I could see Morrison scanning the stands, probably looking for me. "Look," Martinez said, his voice cutting through the noise. "I've been here 8 years. I've seen budget meetings where they vote themselves raises while cutting programs my own kids benefit from. Maybe it's time someone asked the hard questions." Davis went pale. "Rick, you can't be serious. This is insubordination." "No," Martinez said firmly. "This is a public school, not a private kingdom. Jake, you've got 15 minutes until game time. Whatever you're planning, make sure it's the truth. Because if it is, you'll have more backup than you realize." He turned and walked out, leaving Davis standing there with his mouth hanging open. After a moment of stunned silence, the vice principal pointed a shaking finger at me. "This isn't over, Henderson. When this blows up in your face, and it will, remember that we tried to help you." Then he was gone too, and I was alone in the booth with my laptop, my evidence, and a rapidly approaching halftime show that would either save Westfield High or destroy my future forever. The scoreboard read 7:42 until game time. I plugged in Peterson's device and held my breath. The device connected with a soft beep that barely registered over the crowd noise below. My laptop screen flickered as it synced with the gymnasium's video system, and suddenly I was looking at a live feed of the court where both teams were running warm-up drills. I had control. But my relief lasted exactly 37 seconds, because that's when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus: "Emergency. Check the parking lot. Now." I peered through the booth's side window and felt my stomach drop. 3 news vans had pulled into the faculty parking lot, their satellite dishes gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Channel 7, Channel 12, and what looked like a regional cable network were setting up equipment while reporters checked their hair in car mirrors. Someone had tipped off the media. My phone rang immediately. "Jake, what the hell is going on?" Marcus's voice was tight with panic. "My mom just called and said there's reporters asking about you in the school lobby." I didn't contact any reporters, I whispered, watching Morrison storm across the court toward the main entrance. This wasn't part of the plan. Well, somebody did, because they're asking about financial corruption and embezzlement charges. The whole front office is going crazy. I watched through the window as Morrison spoke urgently into his phone, probably calling an emergency school board meeting or begging the district office for crisis management. This changed everything. If the media was already here, my halftime revelation wouldn't be the bombshell I'd planned, it would just be confirming what they'd already been told. But by who? The answer walked into my booth at exactly 7:31 p.m. Hello, Jake. Mrs. Chen, the fired art teacher, stood in the doorway holding a manila folder thick with documents. Her usually gentle demeanor was replaced by something harder, more determined. I hope you don't mind that I invited some friends to tonight's game. Mrs. Chen. How did you? 23 years in education teaches you a few things about fighting back, she said, settling into the chair beside me. Sandra wasn't the only one keeping records. The difference is, I knew which reporters actually investigate corruption instead of burying it. She opened the folder, revealing spreadsheets, bank statements, and what looked like photographs of checks. Payroll records going back 2 years. Morrison's been running ghost employees through the substitute teacher system, people who don't exist but somehow collect paychecks that get deposited into accounts linked to his wife's maiden name. Jesus, I breathed, scanning the documents. How much? $47,000 over 18 months. That's on top of everything else you found. Below us, the referees were gathering at center court for their pre-game conference. The stands were nearly full now, a sea of blue and gold punctuated by red-clad Roosevelt fans who'd made the 2-hour drive. I spotted several people in suits scattered throughout the crowd who definitely weren't parents, probably district officials doing damage control. There's more, Mrs. Chen continued. The construction company that built Morrison's administrative wing. They've been charging the district for materials that were never delivered. Marble flooring billed at $30,000, actual cost $12,000. The difference went into Morrison's brother's landscaping business. My hands were shaking as I loaded her files onto my laptop. Why now? Why didn't you come forward months ago? Her expression softened slightly. Because I was scared. Because I thought maybe it was just incompetence, not malice. Because I hoped someone else would step up first. She looked directly at me. But watching a 17-year-old risk his future to fight corruption while grown adults stay silent. That's not acceptable. The scoreboard hit 5 o'clock minutes until game time. Morrison was back on the court, but his usual confident smile looked strained as he shook hands with the Roosevelt principal. Wells and Thompson huddled near the bleachers, both talking rapidly into their phones. They know something's coming, I observed. Mrs. Chen nodded. Channel 7's lead reporter cornered Wells in the parking lot 20 minutes ago. Asked her about the Miami conferences and consulting contracts. She actually tried to run. The crowd erupted as our players took the court for final warm-ups. In 90 minutes, these people would know everything. The question was whether Morrison and his cronies would try to shut down the game entirely rather than let the truth come out. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from an unknown number. Gilda Power to the AV booth at halftime and there's a scholarship fund waiting for you at any college you want. Refuse, and you'll never set foot on a university campus anywhere. I showed the message to Mrs. Chen, who just laughed. Too late for bribes now, she said. Half the state education department is probably watching the live stream tonight. The referee's whistle echoed through the gymnasium, and 3,000 people rose to their feet for the national anthem. Game time. The first quarter passed in a blur of squeaking sneakers and roaring crowds, but I barely watched the game. My eyes were glued to my laptop screen, making final adjustments to the presentation that would destroy Morrison's career. Mrs. Chen sat beside me, occasionally pointing out corrections or adding context to the financial documents. That invoice from October 15th, she said, tapping the screen. Morrison claimed it was for new gymnasium equipment. But look at the vendor address. I squinted at the small print. The address matched Morrison's home subdivision. His neighborhood hardware store. His brother-in-law's hardware store. $15,000 for athletic facility improvements that consisted of landscape lighting for Morrison's backyard pool. By the end of the first quarter, we'd assembled a presentation that would make the Pentagon Papers look like a grocery list. Bank records, forged invoices, email chains discussing how to hide money transfers, and most damning of all, the security footage of Morrison and Wells laughing while they discussed firing useless teachers to fund their raises. But at 8:47 p.m., halfway through the second quarter, everything went sideways again. Jake. Officer Martinez appeared in the doorway, but this time he wasn't alone. A woman in a dark suit stood behind him, flashing a badge I couldn't quite read. This is Agent Sarah Reeves, State Bureau of Investigation. She needs to speak with you. My blood turned to ice water. The SBI handled major financial crimes. Had Morrison somehow convinced them I was the criminal here? Mr. Henderson, Agent Reeves said, stepping into the booth. I understand you've been collecting evidence of financial misconduct involving school district officials. Yes, ma'am. Good. We're going to need copies of everything you have. Mrs. Chen and I exchanged confused glances. Copies? I stammered. The state received an anonymous tip 3 weeks ago about potential embezzlement at Westfield High, Reeves explained. We've been conducting a preliminary investigation, but our source went silent after your principal apparently discovered someone was asking questions. Sandra. They were talking about Sandra. We know you've been working with Mrs. Sandra Kowalski before her termination, Reeves continued. What you might not know is that she contacted our office the day after she was fired. She's been cooperating with our investigation ever since. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. So you already know about the embezzlement? We know about some of it. But based on what I'm seeing here, she gestured toward our presentation, you've uncovered significantly more than we had. Particularly this ghost employee scheme. Down on the court, Roosevelt had just taken a 6-point lead, but the crowd's energy felt different somehow. I could see clusters of parents talking urgently to each other instead of watching the game. Word was spreading through the stands like wildfire. Agent Reeves, Mrs. Chen interjected, what happens to Jake's evidence if you take it? Nothing happens to it. But our investigation takes priority over public presentations. My heart sank. They were going to bury this in bureaucracy for months while Morrison and his cronies had time to destroy more evidence and retaliate against more people. How long? I asked. How long before the public knows what's been happening here? These investigations take time, son. Could be 6 months, could be longer. I looked at the scoreboard, 2:43 left in the second quarter. In less than 15 minutes, I could show 3,000 people exactly what their tax dollars were funding. Or I could hand everything over to the state and hope bureaucrats cared as much about justice as they did about proper procedure. Jake, Mrs. Chen whispered. Sandra didn't risk her career so this could disappear into government files. Agent Reeves checked her watch. I need a decision, Mr. Henderson. We can do this the easy way, or we can get a warrant and seize everything. The crowd erupted as our point guard sank a three-pointer, cutting Roosevelt's lead to 3. The scoreboard now read 2:11 until halftime. I looked at my laptop screen, then at Agent Reeves, then at Mrs. Chen. What if there was a third option? What kind of third option? Agent Reeves asked, her tone cautious but curious. I took a deep breath, watching Morrison pace nervously near the scorer's table below. What if we work together? You get all my evidence right now, but I still do the halftime presentation. Think about it, if this goes public tonight, Morrison and his people won't have time to destroy more evidence or threaten more witnesses. Absolutely not, Reeves said immediately. That could compromise our entire investigation. Defense attorneys would claim we orchestrated a media circus to prejudice potential jurors. Mrs. Chen leaned forward. Agent Reeves, how many financial crimes cases actually result in convictions at the school district level? The agent's hesitation was telling. That's not relevant to. It's completely relevant, Mrs. Chen pressed. Because I've seen this before. Administrators get quietly reassigned to other districts. Board members resign with full benefits. Nobody goes to prison, and taxpayers keep funding corruption. I could see Reeves wavering. Below us, the second quarter was winding down with Roosevelt still leading 34-31. The energy in the gymnasium was electric, but I noticed something else. Several more people in suits had appeared throughout the stands. Either district officials or more law enforcement, I couldn't tell which. There's something else you should know, I said, pulling up a new file on my laptop. This morning I received confirmation that Morrison's been selling district property through private auctions and pocketing the proceeds. Agent Reeves's eyebrows shot up. What kind of property? Everything. Surplus computers, old textbooks, even cafeteria equipment. The district records show items being disposed of, but Morrison's been selling them through his wife's eBay account. I showed her screenshots of the listings. $43,000 in the last year alone. Jesus, the agent muttered, scanning the evidence. This is bigger than we thought. The halftime buzzer echoed through the gymnasium, and 3,000 people began their migration toward concession stands and bathrooms. I had maybe 8 minutes before the halftime show was supposed to begin. Agent Reeves, Mrs. Chen said quietly, what if Jake's presentation actually helped your case? Public pressure could prevent evidence destruction and encourage more witnesses to come forward. I could see the internal struggle playing out on the agent's face. She was clearly a by-the-books investigator, but she also understood that Morrison had already proven he'd destroy evidence and silence witnesses when threatened. If I allow this, she said slowly, and it compromises our investigation, careers end. Mine included. If you don't allow this, and Morrison escapes justice because he had time to cover his tracks, how many more schools suffer the same fate? I countered. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, Channel 7 reporter just cornered Wells in the bathroom. She's crying and asking about immunity deals. Whatever you're planning, they know it's coming. I showed the message to Agent Reeves, whose expression shifted from bureaucratic caution to predatory interest. Wells is cracking. Sounds like it. But if we wait 6 months for your official investigation, she'll have time to lawyer up and coordinate her story with Morrison. The agent stared at my laptop screen for a long moment, weighing federal procedure against the messy reality of small-town corruption. Finally, she pulled out her phone. Martinez, I need you to position officers at all exits. Nobody leaves this building until I say so. She looked directly at me. Mr. Henderson, you have 10 minutes to present your evidence. But the second you're done, everything gets turned over to federal investigators. Mrs. Chen smiled for the first time all evening. Sandra's going to love this. I plugged Peterson's override device into the main control panel and watched my laptop sync with the video system. In 60 seconds, Morrison's carefully constructed facade was about to crumble in front of half the county. The scoreboard read 9:47 p.m. Showtime. The gymnasium lights dimmed for the halftime show, and I could feel 3,000 pairs of eyes turning toward the video board. My finger hovered over the enter key as the usual highlight reel began playing, slow-motion shots of our best plays from the season set to generic rock music. 30 seconds, I whispered to Mrs. Chen, who was recording everything on her phone as backup evidence. But then my laptop screen flickered and went black. What the hell? I frantically clicked through Windows, but nothing responded. The override device was still connected, still showing a green light, but my presentation had vanished. Jake. Agent Reeves stepped closer, her voice tense. Someone killed my connection remotely, I said, panic rising in my chest. They must have IT people monitoring the network. Through the booth window, I could see Morrison near the scorer's table, speaking urgently into his phone while watching the video board with obvious relief. Wells had reappeared in the stands, her earlier tears replaced by a smug smile. Mrs. Chen grabbed my shoulder. What about your phone? Can you live stream from there? I pulled up Facebook Live with shaking hands, but the school's Wi-Fi was suddenly requiring administrative passwords I didn't have. They'd locked down everything. For minutes until second half, Agent Reeves said grimly. If we don't act now. Wait. I remembered something Tyler had mentioned months ago about the gymnasium's emergency announcement system. It was completely separate from the main network, designed to work even during power outages. The microphone was hardwired directly to every speaker in the building. I grabbed the emergency PA handset from the booth's control panel and flipped the switch marked Override All Systems. My voice echoed through the gymnasium with startling clarity. Good evening, Westfield High. My name is Jake Henderson, and I need to tell you something about where your tax dollars have been going. The crowd's chatter died instantly. Morrison spun around, scanning the booth area with wild eyes. Wells was already pushing through the crowd toward the exit, but I could see Officer Martinez blocking her path. Over the past 4 months, I've been investigating financial irregularities in our school district, I continued, my voice steadier than I felt. What I found was systematic embezzlement, fraudulent contracts, and the theft of money meant for your children's education. The silence in the gymnasium was deafening. 3,000 people sat frozen, processing what they were hearing. On the court, both basketball teams had stopped their warm-up drills to listen. Principal Morrison gave himself a $45,000 raise while firing Mrs. Chen and eliminating arts programs. Board President Wells approved $80,000 in consulting fees to her husband's company for work that was never performed. Morrison was now running toward the AV booth, his face purple with rage. But Agent Reeves had positioned herself in the main corridor, and I could see her badge clearly visible as she blocked his path. Morrison's administrative wing cost $200,000 of your money, but the actual construction invoices show materials that were never delivered. The difference went to family businesses and personal accounts. My voice was gaining strength as I spoke, each revelation met by gasps and angry murmurs from the crowd. Parents were pulling out their phones, recording everything. The news crews in the parking lot were probably getting audio feed through their equipment. They created fake employees to steal money from the substitute teacher fund. They sold school property through private auctions and kept the profits. They've been stealing from your children for over 2 years. Morrison had somehow gotten past Agent Reeves and was now pounding on the booth door. Henderson. Open this door right now. But I wasn't finished. The most damning evidence was still coming. Everything I'm telling you is documented and verified. The evidence has been turned over to state investigators. But there's one more thing you need to know about the people you trusted to educate your children. I could hear Morrison screaming threats through the door, but his voice was drowned out by the rising anger from the crowd below. Last month's closed board meeting was recorded. You can hear them laughing while they decided which dead-weight teachers to fire next. The gymnasium erupted. What happened next was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. 3,000 people rose to their feet as one, their voices combining into a roar of outrage that shook the building's foundations. Parents who'd been sitting politely moments before were now shouting for Morrison's head. Students poured out of the bleachers onto the court, chanting, "Thief! Thief! Thief!" But Morrison wasn't done fighting. Jake Henderson is a disturbed student who's been making terroristic threats, his voice boomed through a handheld megaphone he'd somehow acquired. He's stolen confidential documents and fabricated evidence to create panic. The crowd's attention split between the PA system and Morrison's desperate counternarrative. I could see confusion rippling through sections of the stands as parents tried to process two completely contradictory versions of reality. That's when Mrs. Chen took the microphone from my hands. My name is Patricia Chen, her voice rang out clear and strong. I taught art here for 15 years until I was fired last month for asking too many questions about the budget. Everything Jake just told you is true, and I have additional evidence. The crowd's focus snapped back to the PA system. Mrs. Chen's reputation was spotless. She'd taught half these parents when they were students themselves. Morrison's been running a ghost payroll scheme through the substitute system. Employees who don't exist but somehow receive paychecks deposited into accounts linked to his family. I have the bank records. Morrison's megaphone crackled to life again. Patricia Chen is a disgruntled former employee spreading malicious lies. Don't let these criminals destroy. His voice cut off abruptly as Officer Martinez physically removed the megaphone from his hands. Through the booth window, I could see Agent Reeves speaking rapidly into her radio while pointing at various exits where more federal agents were now positioned. But the crowd was beyond anyone's control now. What started as angry shouting had evolved into organized chants. The student section began a thunderous, "Pay it back. Pay it back," while parents near the exits were demanding immediate school board resignations. There's more, Mrs. Chen continued into the PA microphone. The construction company that built the administrative wing has been overcharging for materials that were never delivered. The marble flooring billed at $30,000 actually cost $12,000. The difference went directly into Morrison's brother's landscaping business. I watched Thompson, the thin school board member, make a break for the side exit, only to find his path blocked by a wall of furious parents. Someone had apparently recognized him from the pre-game introductions, and they weren't letting him leave without answers. The Miami educational conferences that cost taxpayers $8,000. Wells and Thompson spent exactly 0 hours in seminars and 47 hours on South Beach. I have their hotel receipts and restaurant bills. The Roosevelt High players and coaches, who'd been watching this unfold with growing amazement, started applauding. Their principal walked onto the court and shook hands with several of our players, apparently deciding this was bigger than any basketball rivalry. My phone was buzzing non-stop with texts, but one caught my attention, Channel 7 going live in 30 seconds. Audio feed perfect. Your heroes. Reporter Sarah Kim. Mrs. Chen handed the microphone back to me. Finish it, Jake. I looked out at the sea of faces below, angry parents, shocked students, bewildered visitors who'd just come to watch a basketball game. Morrison stood near center court now, surrounded by federal agents but still shouting about lawsuits and consequences. The investigation is ongoing, I announced. But I want everyone here to remember something. This happened because good people stayed silent for too long. Including me. The gymnasium fell quiet again. Mrs. Rodriguez, Mrs. Chen, Sandra Kowalski, and dozens of other dedicated educators tried to protect your children's future. It's time we protected theirs. The applause started slowly, but within seconds it became a standing ovation that lasted 4 full minutes. The applause was still echoing through the gymnasium when I saw Wells making another desperate break for the exit. This time she ditched her heels and was practically sprinting through the concession area in her stocking feet. But the crowd had other plans. A group of parents formed a human chain, blocking every doorway while chanting, "No one leaves. No one leaves." Agent Reeves's voice crackled through her radio, "We need backup units. The situation is fluid." That's when Morrison played his final card. He grabbed a wireless microphone from the scorer's table and his voice boomed over the crowd noise. "Everyone needs to calm down and listen to the facts. Jake Henderson has been under psychiatric evaluation for making threats against staff members." The lie was so outrageous, so desperate, that it actually worked for about 10 seconds. I could see doubt creeping across some faces in the crowd, parents who didn't know me personally, wondering if maybe Morrison was telling the truth. Mrs. Chin snatched our PA microphone back. Principal Morrison, are you seriously claiming that Jake fabricated 2 years of bank records, forged invoices from multiple vendors, and somehow created fake video footage of your closed board meetings? The video footage was edited. Morrison shot back. Deepfake technology. This whole thing is a coordinated attack by outside agitators trying to destroy public education. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Deepfake technology. Mr. Morrison, I can barely edit TikTok videos without help. But Morrison wasn't done with his conspiracy theories. This is a political hit job funded by private school advocates. Jake Henderson's family has connections too. His microphone cut out abruptly. Officer Martinez held up the wireless receiver he just confiscated, shaking his head in disgust. Agent Reeves had apparently heard enough. She stepped onto the basketball court with a voice amplifier of her own. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Agent Sarah Reeves with the State Bureau of Investigation. The evidence presented here tonight is genuine and has been verified through our ongoing investigation. The crowd's attention shifted to her immediately. Federal agents carried a lot more weight than desperate school administrators. We've been investigating financial irregularities at this district for 3 weeks. What Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Chen have presented tonight corroborates and extends our findings. Principal Morrison and several board members will be taken into custody pending formal charges. That's when the real chaos started. Wells, who'd been trapped near the north exit, suddenly collapsed onto the floor, hyperventilating and sobbing. I never wanted this. Morrison said it was just temporary borrowing. He said we'd pay it back before anyone noticed. Her husband rushed over from the stands, but instead of comforting her, he started screaming, "Catherine, shut up. Don't say another word until we have lawyers." Too late. Agent Reeves was already recording everything on her phone while other agents moved in to separate the couple. I could hear Wells's voice carrying across the gymnasium, $80,000. I didn't know he was stealing from teachers. He said it was surplus money that would just go back to the state. Morrison's face went completely white. His co-conspirator was confessing to federal crimes in front of 3,000 witnesses and at least one live television broadcast. Thompson, the thin board member, apparently decided Wells had the right idea about cooperation. He started pushing through the crowd toward Agent Reeves, waving his arms frantically. I have records. I kept copies of everything because I knew this would happen eventually. Thompson, you bastard. Morrison lunged toward him, but Officer Martinez tackled him before he could reach his fellow board member. The crowd erupted in cheers as handcuffs clicked around Morrison's wrists. My phone buzzed with a text from Sandra, watching the live stream from home. Sandra sends her love. You did it, Jake. You actually did it. But as I looked down at the gymnasium floor, federal agents making arrests, board members turning on each other, parents demanding immediate elections, I realized we hadn't just exposed corruption. We'd started a revolution. The revolution lasted exactly 14 minutes before it nearly got someone killed. I was still in the AV booth, watching Agent Reeves coordinate arrests on the gymnasium floor, when Marcus burst through the door with blood streaming from his nose. Jake, we've got a problem, he gasped, clutching his face. Morrison's son Derek is in the parking lot with half the football team. They're talking about handling this themselves before the cops can get involved. My blood went cold. Derek Morrison was 6'3", 220 pounds of pure entitlement who'd never faced consequences for anything in his life. If his father was going to prison, Derek would blame me personally. How bad is it out there? I asked, helping Marcus clean up his nose with some paper towels Mrs. Chin found. Bad. Derek sucker punched me when I tried to film them with my phone. Said anyone who helped you tonight was going to learn some respect. Marcus winced as he touched his swollen nose. Jake, there's like 12 of them out there, and they're getting more pissed off by the minute. Through the booth window, I could see the crowd below was still in chaos, but it was organized chaos now. Parents were forming committees on the spot, talking about emergency school board elections and forensic audits. The Roosevelt High fans had basically adopted our cause, with their principal promising to share any information about suspicious district spending at away games. But outside in the parking lot, things were apparently going medieval. Mrs. Chin grabbed my arm. Jake, you need to stay in this building until those boys calm down or get arrested. Derek Morrison has been suspended 3 times for fighting, and his father always made the charges disappear. Agent Reeves's voice crackled over Martinez's radio. We've got reports of a disturbance in the north parking lot. Possible assault. Need units to respond immediately. That's when my phone started buzzing with messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Derek Morrison says he's going to find you after the game. Be careful. Anonymous friend. Football team is looking for Jake Henderson. Avoid the parking lots. Concerned parent. Derek just keyed every car with hashtag Westfield Truth bumper stickers. He's lost it. Emma. I showed the messages to Mrs. Chen, whose expression darkened. This is exactly what happens when corruption gets exposed. The enablers get desperate. Down on the court, Morrison was being escorted toward the exit in handcuffs, but he kept turning back to scan the crowd. When his eyes found the AV booth, he pointed directly at me and shouted something I couldn't hear over the crowd noise. Whatever he said, it made Derek's situation worse, because Martinez's radio immediately crackled, parking lot situation escalating. Subject Derek Morrison reportedly making specific threats against a student witness. Requesting immediate backup. That's it, Agent Reeves announced, appearing in our booth doorway. Mr. Henderson, you're coming with us. Federal witness protection doesn't usually apply to high school corruption cases, but we're making an exception tonight. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent months trying to get adults to take this seriously, and now they were treating it like a national security issue. What about the basketball game? I asked, which in hindsight was probably the stupidest question possible under the circumstances. Mrs. Chen laughed despite everything. Jake, honey, I think we're past worrying about basketball scores. She was right. Through the window, I could see both teams had given up any pretense of resuming the game. Players were sitting in the stands with their families, watching federal agents process evidence and take statements. The Roosevelt coach was apparently live streaming the arrests on Instagram. Agent Reeves checked her watch, 10:23 p.m. We need to move you to a secure location until Derek Morrison and his friends are in custody. This whole situation just became a potential witness intimidation case. As if on cue, the lights in the parking lot suddenly went out. All of them, simultaneously, plunging the entire north side of the building into darkness. Someone had found the electrical panel. Agent Reeves was on her radio before the emergency lighting even kicked in. All units, we have a deliberate power outage at the north entrance. Suspects may be attempting to create confusion for escape or retaliation. The gymnasium's emergency lights bathed everything in an eerie red glow, casting long shadows across the court where 3,000 people were now murmuring nervously. But what made my stomach drop was the sound coming from outside, car engines revving, tires squealing, and what sounded like Derek Morrison's voice shouting instructions through a megaphone. They're not trying to escape, I realized aloud. They're trying to trap everyone inside. Mrs. Chen peered through the booth window toward the darkened parking lot. Jake's right. Look at the main entrance. Through the glass doors, we could see the silhouettes of several vehicles positioned directly in front of the building's primary exit. Derek had apparently recruited more than just football players. Those looked like pickup trucks and SUVs, not the cars high schoolers usually drove. Martinez's voice came through Agent Reeves's radio. North exit is blocked by 3 vehicles. Drivers fled on foot when we approached. South exit. There was a pause. South exit also blocked. Someone's been planning this. The crowd in the gymnasium was starting to realize something was wrong. Parents were pulling out their phones, trying to call family members in the parking lot, but getting no answers. The emergency lighting made everyone look ghostly, and the usual exit signs were barely visible. Agent Reeves, Mrs. Chen said quietly, how many people knew Jake was going to make his presentation tonight? The question hung in the air like smoke. I'd been so focused on exposing Morrison's corruption that I hadn't considered who else might be involved. A scheme this elaborate, lasting 2 years, with fake employees and fraudulent contracts, that required more than just a principal and a few board members. The substitute teacher fraud, I said suddenly, pieces clicking together in my mind. You can't run fake employees through payroll without help from the district office. Someone in human resources has been involved from the beginning. Agent Reeves was already pulling up files on her phone. Patricia Vance. The woman who called you with legal threats yesterday. She's been the district's HR director for 4 years, and... Her expression darkened. Her son graduated from Westfield High 3 years ago. Played varsity football. Derek's older brother, Mrs. Chen breathed. Jake, that whole family has been profiting from this corruption. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about a corrupt principal anymore. We'd stumbled into a multi-generational conspiracy involving district officials, board members, and their families. Derek wasn't just defending his father, he was protecting a criminal enterprise that had been funding his lifestyle since middle school. My phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. Everyone stays inside until Jake Henderson agrees to publicly admit he lied about everything. Otherwise the exits stay blocked all night. Patriots defending public education. Patriots. I showed the message to Agent Reeves, who immediately forwarded it to her tactical team. They're calling themselves Patriots while holding 3,000 people hostage. The temperature in the gymnasium was already rising from poor ventilation and too many bodies. I could see parents fanning their children with programs while elderly grandparents looked increasingly uncomfortable in the stifling air. But Derek Morrison had made one crucial mistake. He trapped himself in the parking lot with federal agents, multiple news crews, and about 50 very angry parents who'd come outside to smoke or make phone calls. His revolution was about to meet theirs. The standoff lasted exactly 47 minutes before it turned into a complete disaster for Derek Morrison and his Patriots. What Derek hadn't counted on was Mrs. Rodriguez. Our former choir director had been in the parking lot when the lights went out, trying to comfort some of her former students who were crying about the corruption revelations. But when Derek's trucks blocked the exits and his voice started blaring threats through that megaphone, something snapped in the woman who dedicated 22 years to Westfield High. I watched through the booth window as she marched directly toward Derek's pickup truck, still wearing her evening dress and heels from the basketball game. Behind her, about 30 parents formed a line, including several fathers who looked like they'd played football themselves back in the day. Derek Morrison. Her voice carried across the parking lot without any amplification. You get those vehicles moved right now, or I'm calling your grandmother to come down here and straighten you out. The threat of involving Grandma Morrison apparently hit harder than federal agents with radios. I could see Derek's silhouette in the truck cab, and even from this distance, his body language looked less confident. But his response was pure entitled teenager. Mrs. Rodriguez, this doesn't concern you. Jake Henderson destroyed my family with his lies, and... Your father stole money from my classroom supply budget, she shot back. I've been buying sheet music with my own paycheck for 2 years because your family treated this school like their personal ATM. The parents behind her erupted in agreement. Someone shouted about missing textbooks, another about broken computers that never got replaced despite technology upgrades appearing in the budget. Agent Reeves was watching the parking lot confrontation through binoculars, speaking rapidly into her radio. Civilian intervention in progress. Subjects appear to be retreating. She was right. Derek's carefully planned siege was crumbling as more parents emerged from the building's side entrances, exits his football team hadn't thought to block. Within minutes, his 3 trucks were surrounded by about 60 very angry adults who were done being polite about their children's stolen education funding. Jake, Mrs. Chen said, pointing toward the main entrance, look at Derek's backup plan falling apart. 2 of his football teammates were arguing near the south exit, their voices carrying through the glass doors. From what I could hear, they just realized that blocking emergency exits during a public event was probably a felony, regardless of their noble intentions to defend Derek's family honor. My phone buzzed with updates from people trapped outside. Derek just tried to drive away, but parents are sitting on his hood. Marcus. Channel 7 reporter is interviewing Mrs. Rodriguez live. She's destroying the Morrison family on camera. Emma. 3 football players just surrendered to cops. Derek is alone in his truck crying. Anonymous. That last message made me feel something unexpected, pity. Derek Morrison was an entitled bully who just tried to hold 3,000 people hostage, but he was also an 18-year-old kid watching his father get arrested for crimes that would probably send him to prison for years. But my sympathy evaporated when Agent Reeves's radio crackled with an update. Subject: Derek Morrison just attempted to ram through the civilian blockade. No injuries, but he's destroyed 2 parked cars and a news van. Pursuing on foot. Through the window, I could see chaos in the parking lot as Derek abandoned his truck and started running toward the woods behind the school. Federal agents were converging from multiple directions, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Well, Mrs. Chen observed dryly, that escalated quickly. The gymnasium crowd had no idea what was happening outside, but they could hear sirens, shouting, and what sounded like helicopters approaching. Parents were getting increasingly agitated, demanding answers that nobody seemed able to provide. That's when I made a decision that Agent Reeves definitely wasn't going to like. I grabbed the PA microphone one more time. Everyone, please stay calm, my voice echoed through the gymnasium one final time. The exits are being cleared now. Derek Morrison and several other individuals tried to prevent people from leaving, but federal agents and your fellow parents have the situation under control. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the crowd, followed immediately by renewed anger as people realized they'd been held hostage by an 18-year-old having a tantrum. Agent Reeves shot me a look that could have melted steel, but she didn't try to stop me from continuing. I know this has been an overwhelming night for everyone. 2 hours ago, you came here to watch a basketball game. Instead, you've learned that people you trusted with your children's futures have been stealing from them for years. Through the window, I could see Derek being led away in handcuffs, his head hanging in defeat. The parking lot was now flooded with police cars, news vans, and federal vehicles with flashing lights that made the whole scene look like something from a movie. But here's what I want everyone to remember: tonight happened because regular people decided to fight back. Mrs. Chen risked her reputation to speak truth. Sandra Kowalski lost her job rather than stay silent. Parents like Mrs. Rodriguez stood up to bullies half their age. Students like Marcus took punches for asking questions. The applause started in the student section and spread throughout the gymnasium. But I wasn't finished. Principal Morrison stole $127,000 from programs meant for your children. Board President Wells funneled $80,000 to her husband's fake consulting business. They created ghost employees, sold school property, and gave themselves raises while firing teachers who dedicated their careers to this place. My voice was getting stronger now, feeding off the crowd's energy. But the biggest theft wasn't money, it was hope. They stole hope from students who lost arts programs, hope from teachers who couldn't get basic supplies, hope from families who trusted them to do better. Agent Reeves stepped beside me, taking the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the evening's activities. Exits are now clear, but we'll need statements from anyone who witnessed threats or intimidation tonight. As 3,000 people began filing out of the gymnasium, I felt Mrs. Chen's hand on my shoulder. Jake, you know what's going to happen now, don't you? I nodded. The trials would take months. Morrison, Wells, Thompson, and Patricia Vance from HR would probably all go to prison. Derek would face federal charges for witness intimidation and false imprisonment. The district would need a complete financial audit going back 5 years. But more importantly, Westfield High would get new leadership. The emergency school board election 3 weeks later saw the highest voter turnout in county history. Mrs. Rodriguez was elected board president by a landslide. The new superintendent, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, had built her career investigating educational fraud. 6 months later, our renovated science labs had equipment that actually worked. The music program was restored with instruments donated by community members who'd watched my presentation online. Mrs. Chen was rehired as arts department chair, with a budget that would have made Morrison weep. And Morrison? He was serving 4 years in federal prison, sharing a cell with a man who'd embezzled from a children's charity. Wells got 3 years. Thompson testified against everyone and got probation. Derek spent his 19th birthday in county jail. As for me, Northwestern accepted me after all. Apparently, exposed massive municipal corruption looks pretty good on college applications. I'm majoring in investigative journalism now, because someone needs to keep asking the hard questions. The final score that night was Roosevelt 34, Westfield 31. But nobody remembered the basketball game. They remembered the night 3,000 people learned what democracy looks like when ordinary citizens refuse to stay silent. Sometimes the good guys actually win.